Well, hello, this is Dr. Peter Murano, and today I wish to discuss something that becomes increasingly important as we age. Not simply whether we exercise or not, but what type of exercise we prioritize. So I invite you to stick with me for this presentation. I think it will be informative for you. This presentation outlines the AMPK mTOR method, a conceptual framework integrating current understanding of cellular energy sensing, anabolic signaling, and physiological adaptation. Some interpretations and applications discussed are integrative and inferential, reflecting synthesis across multiple domains rather than validation by a single unified clinical trial of the method itself. The framework is nonetheless grounded in well-established human and translational research on AMPK and mTOR signaling, caloric restriction, protein intake, endurance and resistance training, and metabolic health. Where direct interventional data are limited, conclusions are drawn from known mechanisms, converging evidence, and consistency with observed physiological responses. Accordingly, the AMPK mTOR method should be regarded as evidence-informed, biologically plausible, mechanistically coherent, and subject to refinement as investigative clinical data emerge. Well, hi, I'm Dr. Pete, and I want to talk to you about exercise. I'm a retired nutrition professor turned certified personal trainer, and I was born in 1954. The men I train are about my age and even older. I've written one book already, this one, and that was back in 2020. I'm happy to say that I have a new book coming out here in 2026. It will be called Hard to Kill, and it offers a new method, a new blueprint for cellular aging designed to not only help us live longer, but to remain strong and capable during the last decade of life, which is the so-called marginal decade. I call my strategy the AMPK mTOR method. Now, without getting too deep, the book is good for that, by the way. AMPK and mTOR are two key cellular signaling pathways in the body that can strongly impact how we age, and they can be turned on or off intentionally once we know how, and is through certain kinds of activities and our diet. And that's what the method is all about, understanding these two pathways, AMPK one and mTOR the other, and also understanding the advantages of their being either activated or blunted as we age. Now, moving on to the topic of exercise, I will start by saying that most people think they understand exercise. They certainly know what makes them sweat, right? What leaves them out of breath or breathless, and what feels hard. But very few people understand what their workouts are actually telling their body's cells to do. Two people can train just as intensely, burn the same number of calories, and walk away from their training equally exhausted, yet one is sending their body a powerful message to rebuild and strengthen, while the other is quietly signaling it to dismantle and repair. Did you know that? Well, as men and women move into their 60s, 70s, and beyond, that difference stops being academic. It becomes the difference between strength and frailty, independence and dependence, resilience and collapse. What you're about to hear is not about working harder in the gym. It's about giving your body the right instructions at the right time. So if this sounds interesting to you, please stick with me. I've got some slides that I've prepared. I'll be talking over the slides to hopefully explain them to everyone's satisfaction. And I hope you will stay with me and enjoy them. Thank you. Now, today, many people assume that the hardest workout is automatically the best workout. But as we get older, the body responds very differently to different forms of stress. And from an exercise physiology perspective, two exercise approaches dominate modern fitness culture, and they are high-intensity metabolic training and high-recruitment resistance training. So the first type is your cardio endurance variety, and the second one is lifting weights or exercising against resistance loads. And although they may both feel difficult, they send very different biological instructions to the body. And understanding the roles of AMPK and mTOR will help explain why this distinction may determine whether we simply survive longer or remain strong and capable during the later decades of life. So, as I just indicated, as we age, the two major exercise strategies exist that tend to dominate fitness discussions. One being the high-intensity metabolic training, which is the breathless, exhausting style of exercise, often associated with circuit training, interval training, and calorie-burning workouts, while the other is high-recruitment resistance training. And you'll probably be wondering, what are you recruiting? But this kind of training focuses on force production, power, and mechanical loading. And although both types of exercise can be valuable, they train very different systems within the body. One primarily improves the systems that help keep us alive, meaning our metabolism, cardiovascular system, and energy regulation, while the other helps preserve the systems that keep us physically capable, our muscle, power, connective tissue, and structural strength. And the distinction becomes critically important as we move toward the so-called marginal decade of life, the final 10 years. So let's break this down, starting with the question, what is high-intensity training? Well, high intensity refers to metabolic stress, and high-intensity training primarily stresses the body's energy systems. This includes things like HIIT workouts, interval training, metabolic circuits, and other forms of exercise that leave you breathless and exhausted. During this type of training, heart rate rises rapidly, and oxygen demand increases, lactate accumulates in muscle, and the body enters a state of metabolic stress. All of this activates AMPK, the cellular energy sensor responsible for helping the body adapt during periods of energetic challenge. AMPK is extremely important for health and survival. It improves glucose regulation, mitochondrial function, fat utilization, and metabolic resilience. But it is important to understand that this type of training is primarily about energy management and survival adaptation, not maximal muscle preservation or power development. And here we ask about breathless and what that term really means. It is actually a cellular state. And when I use the term breathless, I'm not referring to weak lungs or poor conditioning. Breathlessness is actually a cellular state that occurs when the muscles are demanding energy faster than oxygen can be delivered to support their kind of metabolism, which is called aerobic metabolism, requiring oxygen. When that happens, the body shifts toward anaerobic metabolism, not requiring oxygen. Lactate and hydrogen ions accumulate, breathing becomes rapid and deep, and the cells begin signaling distress. You know how that feels? AMPK senses this energetic crisis and shifts the body towards survival mode. And in that moment, the body prioritizes fuel management as well. Conservation and adaptation. The message becomes, energy is limited, so survive first and foremost. And this is why breathless exercise feels so intense. The body is hard, or working hard, to restore energetic stability. So, what does AMPK actually do? Well, we should think of it in terms of survival and repair. AMPK is one of the body's greatest survival pathways, and when it is activated, it helps the body become more metabolically efficient and resilient. AMPK promotes fat burning, improves glucose uptake into cells, stimulates mitochondrial growth, and activates cellular cleanup processes known as autophagy. These are profoundly important anti-aging mechanisms that help maintain metabolic health and reduce disease risk. This is why endurance exercise and metabolic conditioning are associated with improvements in cardiovascular health and insulin sensitivity and longevity. However, there is an important limitation, and it is while AMPK is excellent for survival and metabolic health, it is not the pathway primarily responsible for preserving strength, power, and muscle mass, and we need to appreciate this. Those functions instead depend much more heavily on mTOR and mechanical loading. So why doesn't breathless training build power? Well, let's think of it this way. Survival takes priority over strength. When AMPK becomes highly activated, the body shifts resources toward endurance and survival, and at the same time, mTOR signaling, which is the pathway responsible for muscle growth and structural building, power, and strength, becomes suppressed. And in this state, the nervous system favors fatigue-resistant muscle fibers that can continue functioning under energetic stress. Power output drops, speed drops, high force contraction becomes less important to the body than simply surviving the metabolic challenge. And this is a major reason why breathless exercise does not strongly preserve fast-twitch muscle fibers. And this is where many older adults accidentally make a mistake. They assume that the workout that leaves them the most exhausted must also be the workout that protects them best from aging. But exhaustion is not the same thing as growth, and fatigue is not the same thing as structural preservation. And it's a nuance here, but longevity does not equate to capability for longevity. And hopefully I'll make that distinction clear in this presentation. So here we go in this slide. The big mistake many older adults make is feeling destroyed does not equate to aging better. So if your workouts leave you totally wiped out, it's not going to be good in terms of how you age. Many older adults have been taught to chase fatigue in the gym. They believe that the harder the workout feels, the more beneficial it must be. Sweat becomes associated with success. Exhaustion becomes associated with progress, but aging physiology does not really work that way. Breathless, metabolically stressful training certainly improves cardiovascular fitness and metabolic resilience. There's no doubt about it. But it does not strongly preserve the fast-twitch muscle fibers responsible for power, balance, and rapid force production. And those are precisely the qualities most associated with independence later in life. So in other words, if you only perform breathless training, you might have a better chance at living longer, but the quality of your life is not going to be that great because you're not going to have the muscle power to be independent. That's the thing. But the encouraging news is that older muscle still responds remarkably well when given the proper signals, and the key is learning to distinguish between metabolic exhaustion and high-quality mechanical recruitment for power. So at this point, we want to know, what is high-recruitment training all about? Well, high recruitment equals force plus speed. And I can tell you just a quick anecdote that after knee replacement surgery and hip repair, open reduction, internal fixation on both femurs, the rehab was pretty tough. And I didn't have any power or strength in my legs. They felt like rubber bands, in addition to having the pain associated with recovery after surgery. So my ability to generate force and speed went down the drain, and only through rehabilitation, which focused, quite frankly, on strength training of the legs and the rest of the body, did I get back to where I needed to be. And I can tell you that walking without stumbling and falling became one of the indicators that things were starting to go right in my rehab. Because at first, if I would stumble or take a misstep, I would very likely go down. But once the force and speed came back to the leg muscles and so forth, that didn't happen. I could recover, and that was a wonderful moment, I'll tell you. So high recruitment training. It focuses on force production and explosive intent, and it's the fast twitch muscle fibers that are being recruited, not simply because you feel tired, as you would if you were doing slow twitch aerobic exercise. They are recruited, these fast twitch ones are recruited when the nervous system senses that high force must be generated quickly against meaningful resistance. So we're talking strength training, folks. That is why that form of training, also called resistance training, is so important with aging. Don't make the mistake of thinking that it's endurance training that's important. When you intentionally move a weight explosively, even under controlled conditions, as in an appropriate workout, the nervous system recognizes the need for high threshold motor unit recruitment, and the fast twitch fibers are brought online, so to speak, and mTOR signaling becomes activated. And these are the things that we want to have happen, because this creates a very different physiological message, different from breathless metabolic training, I mean. Instead of survival and energy conservation, the body receives the instruction to maintain strength, structure, and power. And now for the so what. Who cares? Why does this matter? Well, it matters because we're getting old, right? Aging is pretty much meaning here the loss of power. And aging is not simply the loss of muscle size. It is the progressive loss of power, reaction capability, tendon integrity, and structural resilience. So the fast twitch type 2 muscle fibers decline sooner and more rapidly than the endurance fibers as we age. And unfortunately, those fast twitch type 2 fibers are also the fibers most responsible for preventing falls, for being able to charge up a flight of stairs or just get up a flight of stairs. And speaking of getting up off the ground. When's the last time you did that without any assistance or holding on to a rail? How about catching yourself when you stumble that I was talking about earlier, and maintaining overall independence? That's what it's all about as we get older. It's not about going to the gym to develop the bodybuilder physique at all. At the same time, tendon strength, which declines, and bone density, which also declines. When mechanical loading becomes insufficient, is what I'm saying. So we have to think about not just muscle, but also tendon and bone. And this is why frailty accelerates so rapidly after about age 60. And this is precisely why preserving power and recruitment becomes so important during the later decades of life. So as a strength training coach, I need to be sure that my clients understand how to train for power. And this is what I'm going to communicate to you right now. So I'm calling it here the power pairing. So it's two things together that we keep in mind. Explosive up, controlled down. So if we're thinking of moving a barbell with our arms, such as with a curl or an overhead press or a bench press, so we want to go fast as we move the bar in the upward direction, and then come back down slowly. And one of the most powerful approaches in resistance training is this combination of an explosive, what is called a concentric phase, with a slow, controlled eccentric phase. So those are the upward and the downward movements that we have to concentrate on, quite frankly. And when people take a weight and just very casually move it up and down, they miss out on achieving this pairing of explosive concentric with controlled slower eccentric. And the explosive lifting phase is what recruits the fast twitch muscle fibers and activates the nervous system's power-producing pathways. It tells the brain that strong, rapid force production is still required by this person in their life, and the body will adapt. Whereas the lowering phase, when performed slowly and under control, creates high mechanical tension within the muscle, the tendons, and the connective tissues. And this tension is one of the strongest activators of mTOR signaling and structural adaptation. So together, they create an ideal pairing: high recruitment plus high mechanical tension. Did you get that? And the body receives a very clear anabolic signal without excessive metabolic chaos. So in a real sense, we're talking about survival versus capability here. AMPK and mTOR, related to those two terms, protect different futures. AMPK-oriented training and mTOR-oriented training each protect different aspects of aging, is what I'm saying here. AMPK training supports metabolic health, endurance, glucose regulation, and disease resistance, among other things. It is profoundly protective, therefore, for lifespan, living longer. Whereas mTOR-oriented training preserves muscle mass, fast twitch fibers, tendon strength, bone integrity, and physical capability. So it protects health span, which is the ability to remain functional and independent. And that is why I often summarize this distinction that AMPK helps you survive while mTOR helps you stay capable as you survive. Now, if you just have mTOR training, you'll stay capable, but not for as long as you could if you also had AMPK training. So healthy aging requires both systems. The key is learning how to orchestrate them properly rather than sending conflicting signals simultaneously. So that brings me to a slide titled The AMPK-mTOR Method, something that I talk about constantly on this channel. So if you're a regular listener, you already know about all this. So just sit back and relax. But it's about separating these signals, the AMPK-mTOR method. It's built around signal separation, which then leads to signal clarity. On AMPK days, the focus shifts toward repair, mitochondrial renewal, metabolic flexibility, and cellular cleanup. Activities may include Zone 2 cardio training, walking, fasting, or lower intensity endurance work designed to activate AMPK without overwhelming recovery capacity. On the other hand, on mTOR days, the goal changes completely. The focus becomes mechanical loading, explosive intent, as we discussed, slow eccentrics, fast twitch fiber, recruitment, and structural preservation. Instead of mixing these competing demands into the same workout, the body receives clearer instructions at different times. Repair when it is time to repair, and build when it is time to build. So, as we age, the clarity here becomes increasingly important. Fatigue, remember, is not growth. Sweat is not strength. Breathlessness is not power. AMPK helps us survive, and mTOR helps us remain upright, independent, resilient, and capable. Together, when properly orchestrated, they allow us not merely to live longer, but to age with strength, dignity, and purpose. So I'm going to run through a couple of quick slides here. And this first one just gives us a summary visual of what an AMPK day is all about. It's about creating a strong AMPK signal and a less strong or weaker mTOR signal. And that means that we will get a clearer repair signal from AMPK and much less of a growth signal from mTOR. So these two signals sort of compete with each other. And if we separate them through appropriate training and appropriate diet, so it's all lifestyle, folks, we can achieve an AMPK day. And just to reemphasize what an AMPK day looks like, how do you achieve it? Well, you don't eat as much on an AMPK day. You'll still want to get adequate protein, but your total calories will be less. You might engage in time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting on that day. And your exercising should not be strength training at all. It should be endurance, cardio, aerobic type movements. So it could be walking, it could be treadmill, it could be bicycle, swimming, things of that nature, but not pumping iron. Okay, by contrast, an mTOR day needs to send a clear growth signal instead of a repair signal, and that is achieved when mTOR is the dominant signal and AMPK is less. And how that is achieved is through a combination of a dietary strategy of surplus. We need to have abundant calories. We need to have abundant protein in the diet. We're not going to restrict calories. We're not going to fast at all on an mTOR day, just the opposite. We need to feed the muscle and also engage in the right type of exercise. And exercise is actually the primary stimulus for muscle growth, whereas the diet is secondary. So let's talk about the stimulus coming through exercise. It's not going to be endurance exercise on an mTOR day. Forget about that. Instead, you've got to hit the weights. You've got to move against a resistance. So you can use free weights, you can use cable machines, whatever it is, starting with body weight, but exceeding that as well. And when you engage in strength training or resistance training of that nature, you are going to promote mTOR as the dominant signal. And that's the idea on an mTOR day. We'll take a quick look at this slide titled Signal Clarity Matters. And if you look at the left part of the slide, it says mixing signals throughout the week, and you see how the arrows are going in opposite directions and are blurry. And that simply means combining AMPK and mTOR signaling in the same workout on the same day. And that is something that we wish to avoid as older adults. And the desired approach is instead what you see on the right there, where the arrows are headed in the same direction, and it is simply alternating the top arrow and the bottom arrow throughout the week. So that's alternating AMPK and mTOR signaling on a daily basis, and that produces more responsive adaptation. And this is the basis of the AMPK-mTOR method. And when we achieve alternation of AMPK and mTOR throughout the week, we are actually timing the cell signaling in our body for optimum response. And that means optimum in terms of what AMPK is good at. And we've mentioned all of those different aspects, which include cellular cleanup and repair, and what mTOR is good at. And that, of course, is for promoting growth and strength. And thinking again about AMPK simply as the longevity switch, so to speak, which is a simplification, but it serves our purpose here, and mTOR, thinking of it as the strength switch. So we made it to the finish line, and as we close, I want to leave you with perhaps the most important message of all, and it is this: aging well is not about punishing yourself to exhaustion. And I see people doing this in the gym, and that is all wrong as we get older. It is not about chasing fatigue, sweating the most, or surviving the hardest workout in the room. The goal is not simply to live longer here, it is to remain capable while you are living, to stay strong enough to rise from a chair easily, steady enough to avoid falls, resilient enough to recover from setbacks of whatever kind, and confident enough to continue fully participating in life. And the encouraging truth here is that the aging body will still respond powerfully when given the correct signals. AMPK helps keep us metabolically healthy, resilient, and resistant to disease. mTOR helps preserve the strength, power, connective tissue, and structural integrity, think of bone, that allow us to remain independent. Neither system is the enemy. Neither system alone is the solution. The key is learning to blend them together intelligently. When we stop sending mixed signals and begin training with clarity and purpose, exercise becomes more than simply working out. It becomes an investment in your future physical freedom. Do you think about your training that way? And is your training achieving that? So the choices you make today, the way you move, the way you train, and the biological instructions you repeatedly send to your body, and I'm talking about those signals, AMPK and mTOR, are quietly shaping the quality of your later decades. You do not have to surrender to frailty. You do not have to accept weakness as inevitable. With the right approach, it is possible to age not only longer, but stronger, steadier, and more capable. And this slide just is to remind us that there is a marginal decade in the future for all of us, and that we need to prepare for it if we want to be capable in that last 10 years. And by that I mean that we will have the strength and not just the years added to our lives that will enable us to enjoy life, to perform our activities of daily living without assistance for as long as we can. And so the marginal decade is sort of the focus when we're younger, in our 60s and 70s, to think ahead to that marginal decade and to be able to enter it and maintain capability as long as possible. And the biological model that we are proposing, or framework, is the application of the AMPK mTOR method as we approach the marginal decade. Thank you for taking the time to view this presentation. The fact that you did means you care about your quality of life in the years ahead, not just about how long you will live. Aging well is not about being exhausted or tough in your workouts. It is about training with intention, respecting your biology, and investing in the strength and resilience that will carry you through the decades to come. The choices you make today, the way you move and train, your food choices, and the signals you send to your body's cells are quietly shaping your future. I hope this discussion has given you clarity, direction, and motivation to train smarter, to protect your strength, and to move forward into the next phase of life with purpose and optimism.